everyone. So for this week, we're going to continue with triangle congruency. And in the past, what we've learned is that two triangles are congruent only if we have some information. And that information would be all three corresponding sides are congruent. And we also have to know that all three corresponding angles are congruent. So when you took your last test, what you had to do was you had to look at a congruency statement like this. ABC, triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. And then you guys had to make 3 statements about the sides and 3 statements about the angles. So what you did is you said side AB is congruent to side DE. Then you said side BC is congruent to side EF. Then you would have said side AC is congruent to side DF. And then you had to do the same thing for angles. So you would have said angle A is congruent to angle D. Angle B is congruent to angle E. And angle C is congruent to angle F. That was kind of time consuming to have to write out 3 statements for the sides, 3 statements for the angles. So what we're going to look at today are some little shortcuts where you don't have to have 3 sides and 3 angles. So the first one we're actually going to start with, like I say here, but we can prove 2 triangles are congruent if we have some special information. So the first thing I want to talk about is this thing called SAS. So let's first talk about what it stands for. It stands for side, angle, side. And we actually call it the side angle side triangle congruence. But you'll hear me just call it SAS from now on. So what is the definition of side angle side triangle congruence? Well, we can say that 2 triangles are congruent if two corresponding angles, sorry, I misspoke there. I meant 2 corresponding sides and the angle between them are congruent. That's kind of a wordy definition. So again, 2 triangles are congruent if 2 corresponding sides, now look, in the name of it, 2 sides, and the angle between them, notice the word angle is in between the 2 sides, are congruent. So when you look at the figure that I gave, that's exactly what we see. We see 2 corresponding sides, so it's these 2 sides that are in the same position, those 2 sides that are in the same position, and then notice the angle is in between them. So when we label them, and we actually label, so we've got a side and a side, we have an angle and an angle, and then we have 2 more sides, and then we can clearly see side, angle, side, side, angle, side. If we have that information, then we're allowed to say that these 2 triangles are congruent. And we can actually then assume that every other corresponding side, so these 2 are congruent, and every other corresponding angle would be congruent, so these 2 and these 2. But all we need is this SAS to be able to come to the conclusion that those 2 triangles are congruent. Now, side angle side isn't the only shortcut that we have. We have another one, and that is ASA. And a lot of you guys can probably guess, and when we're in class together, I always have my students guess, and they usually guess what it stands for, and that is angle side angle. So it's just the opposite. The same exact definition, but now instead of 2 sides and an angle in between them, we're going to have 2 angles with a side in between them. So we can say 2 triangles are congruent if 2 corresponding angles and the side between them are congruent. So again, this is the same exact idea as the last one, but what we're looking at is two angles and a side. So let's read that again. Two triangles are congruent if two corresponding angles and the side between them are congruent. And that's the most important part. Just like that last one, the angle had to be between, and this one, the side has to be between them. So here's an example. Let's take a look at the figures. So I've got an angle up here that corresponds to the angle down there. I've got a side right here that corresponds to the side right here, and then this angle corresponds to that angle. And keep in mind, what we learned is a tick mark, double tick mark here matches up with a double tick mark there. Double arcs match up with double arcs. Single arcs match up with single arcs. So again, ASA, ASA. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you guys some examples of ASA, SAS, and sometimes when it's neither. And that's what you're going to be doing on your worksheet today. So let me show you the examples first. All right, so we'll start off with this first example. Now this one's a little bit tricky because when you look at it, one of the sides isn't labeled, but I want to point this out. Notice they're attached. So they have to be the same length because they're attached from top to bottom. So if you want, you can even put a little tick mark there because that implies that these sides are connected. So let's take a look and let's label. I've got a side here. I've got a side there. I've got an angle, and then I've got a side here. Two sides, and the angle is in between them. Again, that angle has to be in between them, so this one would be side angle side, SAS. Let's take a look at another one. Okay, so this has that same situation going on here where they have that shared side. If they share a side, that means that they're congruent because they're the same. So let's take a look. We've got an angle and an angle. Then we have a side, and then we have an angle. So we've got angle, side, angle. Notice the side is like squeezed in between those two angles. The side is connected to both angles, so that's why we're allowed to use angle, side, angle on this one. All right, let's look at the next one. The next one has these two angles that are congruent and these two sides that are congruent. But they don't give me any other angles, and they don't give me any other sides, and they don't give me any other information. So all I have is a side, an angle, angle. Well, we didn't learn one that was called SA or AS. So what we would write here is not congruent. And we could even put in parentheses, not enough information. Because they might be congruent, but they would have to give us a little more information for us to be confident that they are congruent. So let me give you guys two more. All right, we've got that situation again where they're sharing a side. So we can say those sides are congruent, and instead of writing out the words angle and side, I'm just going to start writing A. So I've got A there, A there. I've got my S in the middle, and then A and A. I mean, this one just kind of writes itself. ASA, angle, side, angle, because that side is right in the middle. All right, one more. So we look at these two, they aren't attached. So just like number 3 that we did, we've got to double check now because nothing's attached. We have to make sure we do have 3 pieces of information. So I've got a side and a side. I've got an angle and an angle and a side and a side. And notice again, the key part is that that angle is in between the two sides. They form the angle. The two sides come together to form the angle, and that absolutely is true. So I'm allowed to say that they are congruent by side, angle, side. All right, now for your homework, just kind of had to scan this and ignore that date on there. You're gonna be just choosing side, or angle, side, angle on these problems. Write it on your own piece of paper. If you can print this out, it might be helpful, but you do not have to print it. And this will be attached in Google Classroom with these notes. And when you guys are done, just submit it via Google Classroom on your picture of your own piece of paper. You can submit it via Google Classroom. And as always, you can reach out to me and Miss Etson if you guys have any questions. All right, we'll talk to you later.